Good afternoon. We held the talks with my Indian colleague, friend, Subrahmanyam Jaishankar. The talks were organized as part of the visit of the Russian minister, who also included in his program the holding of another meeting of the Intergovernmental Trade, Economic and Cultural Commission. It took place yesterday. Denis Manturov is the first Deputy Prime Minister. As was discussed today, Mr. Minister, I am very pleased with the results of the meetings of the Intergovernmental Trade, Economic and Cultural Commission. We discussed joint cooperation projects in various areas, including energy, nuclear, space, industry, transport, infrastructure, and many other projects that are being considered by the relevant departments and that will be able to bring our trade, economic and investment cooperation to a new level. Yesterday, the co-chairs of our Intergovernmental Trade, Economic and Cultural Commission noted that last year bilateral trade grew by 15% and set a record in the post-Soviet history of relations between Moscow and New Delhi. We welcome the progress on the implementation of the North-South International Transport Corridor. We have a common interest here with our Indian friends, and we have agreed to stimulate this work. We have a common interest with other participants of this project, and we have promising plans to organize and increase cargo transportation along the Northern Sea route and many other things. We have good results in cooperation in the field of hydrocarbons, in the supply of Russian oil to the Indian market, and we have a common interest in implementing joint energy production projects, including in the Russian Federation, in the Far East and on the Arctic Shelf. In general, the economic base of our particularly privileged strategic partnership is strengthening steadily and progressively, and this once again emphasizes the special nature of our relations. We are convinced that the development of these relations, this strategic partnership, is in line with the core interests of our peoples and contributes to the international regional security and stability, which is very important in the current difficult conditions in the world arena. And our political cooperation, political dialogue at the highest level, at the level of foreign policy agencies and other state structures, has high dynamics, and today we discuss the upcoming events within the framework of this dialogue, including the preparation of the visit of the President of the Russian Federation to India by the end of the current year. We have plans to prepare a solid package of documents for this summit. And, of course, we welcome good traditions in the field of military cooperation, joint exercises, and military technical cooperation, which is also based on very serious historical foundations. On international issues, we talked about the situation in various international configurations in the context of what is happening in Ukraine. Following the telephone conversation of the President of Russia with the Prime Minister of India, we informed our Indian guests in detail about the state of the discussions that are taking place with the participation of our American partners. First of all, as regards the talks that took place in Alaska, when President Putin, on the invitation of President Trump, made a visit to the United States. We also talked about how this interest in rapid regulation can materialize in practice in such a way as to take into account the legitimate interests of the safety of all participants. We discussed the situation in Afghanistan. We have a common position on the need to pragmatically ensure the inclusion of Afghanistan in regional processes. We talked about the Middle East settlement of the catastrophic situation that has arisen in humanitarian terms in the Palestinian territories. We discussed the situation around the Iranian nuclear program and a number of other international issues. We have close coordination in various multilateral structures, such as the UN, BRICS, the Shanghai Organization for the Cooperation of Groups 20, and today we agreed to continue this coordination. I believe that the talks were very useful, complemented the economic agenda that was discussed during the visit of the Prime Minister, and agreed on further contacts, including on the maximum quality preparation of President Putin's visit to India. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Let me begin by saying that it is a pleasure to be back in Moscow, and I thank you, Minister Lavrov, for your warm hospitality and the substantive discussions that we have just concluded. Our meeting allowed a comprehensive review of the entire gamut of India-Russia bilateral relations. We believe that the relations between India and Russia have been among the steadiest of the major relationships in the world after the Second World War. Geopolitical convergence, leadership contacts, and popular sentiment remain its key drivers. On trade and economic cooperation, I followed up with Minister Lavrov the proceedings of yesterday's meeting of the Intergovernmental Commission that I chaired with First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov. We reaffirmed our shared ambition to expand bilateral trade in a balanced and sustainable manner, including by increasing India's exports to Russia. This requires swiftly addressing non-tariff barriers and regulatory impediments, enhancing Indian exports to Russia and sectors like pharmaceuticals, agriculture and textiles will certainly help to correct the current imbalance. Steps to ensure long-term supply of fertilizers was also taken up. Indian skilled workers, especially in IT, construction and engineering, can address the labor needs in Russia and deepen collaboration. Sustaining energy cooperation through trade and investments is also important. We also spoke about connectivity initiatives, including the International North-South Transport Corridor, the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor, and cooperation in the Northern Sea Route. These corridors promise to deepen economic linkages, reduce transit times, and expand trade access between across Eurasia and beyond. Our defense and military technical cooperation also remains robust. Russia supports India's Make in India goals, including joint production and technology transfer. The opening of 2 new Indian consulates in Kazan and Yekaterinburg need to be fast-tracked. That was also a subject of our conversation today. These consulates will further deepen our regional outreach and enhance trade and people-to-people ties. I took up the issue of Indians serving in the Russian army. While many have been released, there are still some pending cases with some missing persons. We hope that the Russian side would expeditiously resolve these matters. On global and multilateral cooperation, we reaffirmed our shared commitment to reform of global governance. We underlined the imperative to expand and energize the UN Security Council to reflect contemporary realities. Our collaboration in the G20, BRICS, and SCO remains deep-rooted and forward-looking. On regional issues, we discussed developments in Ukraine, West Asia, Middle East, Afghanistan. And I want to say that India's approach continues to emphasize dialogue and diplomacy as essential to resolving differences. On terrorism, we resolved to fight jointly against all forms and manifestations of terrorism. I conveyed India's strong resolve to adopt a zero-tolerance policy against terrorism and our sovereign right to defend our citizens against cross-border terrorism. I also invited the Minister to pay a visit to India to continue our dialogue. In conclusion, let me thank him and his colleagues for an open and productive exchange of views. We look forward to nurturing this relationship further in the very spirit that has underpinned it for decades. Thank you.
In terms of security for Ukraine, who and how should provide new possible agreements, given the negative experience of the Minsk agreements?
It is well known that President Putin has repeatedly referred to this situation. In April, the Ukrainian side submitted a document with a principal project, which was approved by the delegation of Ukraine and the Russian Federation. The main principles of ensuring security during the post-conflict period were already there, and it was about ensuring the security in an honest and collective manner, first of all, by creating a group of guarantor countries that would include countries that are permanent members of the UN Security Council, Germany, Turkey, and a list of these guarantors would be opened for the joining of any desired countries. These countries would guarantee the security of Ukraine. In fact, in the course of the logic that lies at the heart of the Article 5 of the Washington Treaty on NATO, but I emphasize that Ukraine will remain a non-bloc state, will not join NATO and other military alliances, a nuclear-free state and a neutral state. By the way, these components, neutrality, non-nuclear status and non-bloc status, were enshrined in the 1990 Declaration on the Sovereignty and Independence of Ukraine, and it was these principles that served as the basis for Ukraine being recognized as an independent state. Therefore, when the document approved in Istanbul was undermined by the actions of the British Prime Minister at the time, as I understand, with the encouragement of other Western representatives, this opportunity was lost. But the principle that was laid down in the proposals of Ukraine, we consider absolutely natural and relevant today. The principle of a collective guarantee of security. And when now, following the summit of Russia and the United States in Alaska, where significant progress has been made in the development of the path of determining the contours and specific parameters for regulation, and when, following this event, European countries followed Mr. Zelensky to Washington and tried to promote their agenda, which is aimed at ensuring that guarantees of security are built on the logic of isolation of Russia, on the logic of uniting the Western world with Ukraine in order to continue aggressive confrontational policy, on the logic of restraint of the Russian Federation, and, of course, still imposing a strategic defeat on us. Of course, this cannot cause us any feelings except complete rejection. Moreover, the Ukrainian regime and its representatives comment on the current situation in a very specific way, directly showing that they are not interested in a stable, fair, and long-term settlement. And there is Mr. Podolyak, who constantly speaks on behalf of President Zelensky, as they call him, and he said literally the following, commenting on what is happening around the topic of guarantees of security, which means that while Ukraine receives such guarantees and reconciles with the fact that part of its territory, as he put it, will remain temporarily under occupation. After such an agreement on guarantees of security from the West, Ukraine will demand the sanctioned destruction of the Russian Federation and the collapse of the Russian economy. That is, the goals that remain with the current Ukrainian leadership, and these goals, of course, are heated by the Western sponsors of the Kiev regime. They are aimed against the efforts made by President Trump, with whom we are actively and specifically cooperating in the search for long-term, stable ways to settlement, in order to eliminate the root cause, and the other side, on the contrary, wants to aggravate these root causes, creating some alliances in the sphere of security and security of Ukraine on an anti-Russian basis, on the basis of aggressive intentions and preservation of these aggressive intentions in relation to our country. And when we read such statements, and there was also a statement from the representative of Zelensky's office, who said that there is no point in discussing the issues of peaceful settlement until the guarantees of security are clearly formulated. That is, what does it mean? It means that Ukraine first wants to get a guarantee from the West, preservation on the part of the territory of the former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, preservation on this territory of the current regime, which has a frankly neo-Nazi, Russophobic, aggressive character, which violates the principle of ensuring human rights, which are fixed in the UN Charter and require respect for the rights of any person, regardless of race, sex, language, and religion. We have already, I do not know how many times, drew attention to the fact that the West, which teaches everyone how to ensure human rights in accordance with various neoliberal doctrines, discussing Ukraine, has never said a word about human rights in all these years. What does it mean? It means that the West is pleased with how the Ukrainian regime exterminates the Russian language in all spheres, education, culture, mass media, how this regime prohibits the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, how this regime exalts Bandera and other collaborators convicted by the Nuremberg Tribunal for cooperation with Hitler's Germany, and the West is satisfied with such a regime. And when, against this background, Ursula von der Leyen and other figures in Brussels declare with pathos that Ukraine should be fully supported because Ukraine protects European values, well, here you go. This is an obvious confession with recognition of what these European values really are. Once again, I would like to emphasize that Russia has always been in favor of an honest conversation, and the guarantees of security that were agreed upon, I would like to emphasize, on the initiative of the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul in April 2022, they are supported by us. They were supported then, and they are supported today because they are based on the principle of collective security, on the principle of indivisibility of security, and everything else, everything one-sided is, of course, an absolutely hopeless idea.
Mr. Minister, U.S. White House Trade and Economic Advisor Peter Navarro recently said that India should behave differently and that India's purchase of Russian oil is financing the conflict in Ukraine. What do you think Washington wants to achieve with such statements? And is such pressure an attempt to weaken relations between our countries? Or is the U.S. in this way trying to force India to sign a trade agreement on more favorable terms for them? Thank you.
Well, I don't want to comment on a person, but let me comment on the subject. We are not the biggest purchasers of Russian oil, that is China. We are not the biggest purchasers of Russian LNG. I'm not sure, but I think that is the European Union. We are not the country which has the biggest trade surge with Russia after 2022. I think there are some countries to the south. We are a country where actually the Americans said for the last few years that we should do everything to stabilize the world energy markets, including buying oil from Russia. Incidentally, we also buy oil from America, and that amount has been increasing. So quite honestly, we are very perplexed at the logic of the argument that you had referred to.
Based on the statements and actions of the leaders of the so-called wishing coalition in recent days, can their goal be to break the negotiation process between Russia and the United States? How can this be opposed? And can we expect any provocation from them? Zelensky said that his meeting with Vladimir Putin is supposedly already being prepared. Could you confirm or refute this? Is it already being prepared?
As for the motives of the so-called wishing coalition, I see many signs that this activity is aimed specifically at undermining the progress that has begun to emerge, clearly emerging, as a result of the summit in Alaska, as a result of the previous contacts between representatives of the American administration and the Russian side. In fact, both foreign analysts and foreign observers, when they describe the current situation and the unprecedented activity of European representatives, they come to the same conclusion that the goal is to break the agenda, which is aimed at eliminating the primary causes and achieving the most sustainable settlement, and to turn everything into a plane of guaranteed security for Ukraine without the participation of the Russian Federation, and in general, by ignoring Russian interests and emphasizing the need to protect Ukraine from future attacks. But to protect Ukraine, which professes neo-Nazi values, which very rudely violates the rights of national minorities, which is trying to legally exterminate the Russian language in all spheres of life, which prohibits the canonical Orthodox Church. And this is the kind of Ukraine the West wants to take under its own guarantees of security. And it becomes so obvious to everyone, in my opinion, that I really hope that this conspiracy, this adventure will fail. And we will continue to follow the course agreed by the President of Russia and the United States in the course of their meetings in Alaska and in the course of subsequent telephone contacts. As for the meeting that Zelensky is talking about, well, remember that he for a very long time stated that he would never negotiate with Putin. He still has not cancelled his decree 3 years ago, in my opinion, in which it is strictly forbidden to negotiate with Putin. And it is clear that his activity on the subject of organizing a summit with a Russian leader also aims to show his allegedly constructive focus on the process of regulation, and in fact, to simply substitute serious, difficult work on the coordination of the principles of a stable resolution of the crisis with such effects in the style of KVN. In the style of Kvartal 95 and other tricks in which the current so-called Ukrainian leader uses very, very actively, fearing that attention will fall to him, as it already happens. But our president has repeatedly said that he is ready to meet, including with Mr. Zelensky, with the understanding that all issues that require consideration at the highest level will be well worked out, and experts, ministers will prepare the appropriate recommendations, and, of course, with the understanding that when and if the case, I hope when, the case comes to the signing of future agreements, then the question of the legitimacy of the person who will sign these agreements with the Ukrainian side will be resolved.
And a question to the head of the Indian Foreign Ministry. Mr. Minister, please tell us how you could assess the results of the meeting of the Inter-Rights Commission, what it means for your country and for relations between Russia and India.
As Minister Lavrov also informed you, we are preparing for the annual summit between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi at the end of this year. So the Intergovernmental Commission is the body which does much of the preparation. Of course, we do the political consultations and the bilateral relation review with Mr. Lavrov as well. So I think these two meetings today with him and with Mr. Manturov have been very useful in terms of taking practical cooperation in different fields. I would particularly mention trade, investment. We signed the terms of reference for the India-Eurasian Economic Union FTA. We hope to commence negotiations very soon. So I think we've gone forward in trade, looking at trade barriers, at greater market access. We've looked at energy, including not just fossil fuel energy, but also nuclear energy, where we have a very strong history of cooperation with Russia. I think very good discussions on fertilizer supply. Russia is one of the major suppliers for India. We looked at other areas, including infrastructure, opportunities for business in both countries, the mobility of skilled labor from India to Russia. So what we have done is we are lining up outcomes for the summit. We are taking practical steps so that actually the substance of our relationship grows. At the same time, of course, in our own consultations, I think the political exchange of views is very helpful in making sure the two countries understand each other's interests. So I'm really very, very satisfied with that meeting.